Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana-shalakaya Chakshurunmilitamena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So thank you very much for allowing us to serve you in this manner. Thank you for being here and being patient. It's 7:45. I'm sure most of you are hungry, so I'm going to keep this quite short. And I'm going to try and see what I can share in the 30 minutes or so that we have. You have to be sensitive. Now, I guess everyone looks very blissful because I think you've had a wonderful experience and you have been exposed to the kirtan of Prabhu here and Vishnu Gada Prabhu. So what we wanted to do was talk a little bit about happiness because I see some very happy faces. So I thought we'll just talk a little bit about happiness. And the question that I have is, for us to get happiness, it requires some action. So maybe we should start talking a little bit about action. And then we will also get to the part as to why we are celebrating Janmastami on the 18th of August. When was Janmastami? I'm sorry? The 9th. It was the 9th. Why are we here on the 18th? And is there any purpose served by assembling 9 days later to celebrate Janmastami? We'll touch upon that as well. Because it's important. Maybe those doubts are in the minds of some of you, thinking this is not Janmastami. Janmastami was 10 days back. What am I doing here? What purpose is being served by this program? So we'll touch upon it. First, let's start and talk about action. What action was done today for us to become happy? So we want to focus a bit on action. Now, understand this. None of us can act unless we assume an identity. Someone thinks they belong to a corporation. They assume the identity of being an employee of a corporation, and it makes them act in a certain manner. Agreed? I am an employee of a bank, and I act in a certain manner. I am a father. I act in a certain manner. I'm a husband. So there's some action involved, but I keep in mind that I'm a husband. I am the member of a community. I am the national of a certain country. I was born somewhere and I spent time elsewhere and I'm living elsewhere. So there are different identities and every identity is important, and we think of acting only after considering that there's a certain identity. Right? Is it agreeable? Everyone agrees with the proposition that first there has to be an identity that comes in mind because there is a certain way in which the father will act with the daughter. There's a certain way in which the father or the husband will act with the wife. This difference comes in because there's 100% understanding that there's an identity involved. The manager in an organization acts in a certain manner. The employees act in a different manner because they have identities of being a manager and being an employee, being a subordinate. Agreed? Everyone has a boss, no matter who you are. No matter who you are, you have a boss and you have an identity of being subordinate to that boss. And the boss has an identity of being in a superior position. And this identity allows him or her to act in a certain manner. Does everyone agree with this proposition that the identity is so important? Now, how does the identity work? Right? And this identity is so important that it was a crisis. 5,000 years back, there was an identity crisis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Everyone knows Kurukshetra? Most of you are from the north, from India, from Bangladesh. You know Kurukshetra. There was an identity crisis 5,000 years back. And the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to resolve the identity crisis. This was his solution to the identity crisis. So let's talk about the crisis that took place 5,000 years back. And we will come back to the other points we shared about happiness. 5,000 years back, the identity crisis that was seen on the battlefield of Kurukshetra was between Krishna, the Supreme Lord, the personality of Godhead, and his beloved friend Arjun. Who was in a crisis? Arjun. Arjun was in an identity crisis because he wanted to act But before he acted, he had to first determine what his identity was. Because being the disciple of Drona would have forced him to act in a certain manner. Being the grandson of Bhishma would have forced him to act in a certain manner. Being the nephew of Dhritarashtra would have forced him to act in a certain manner. Being the cousin of Duryodhana would have forced him to act in a certain manner. Being the servant and the friend of Krishna was forcing him to act in a different aspect. It was action, but the action itself was modulated, it was forced upon, it was altered, it was refined by first assuming an identity. So what was the crisis of Arjuna 5,000 years back? His crisis, as he presented it to Krishna, was, Krishna, your orders are wonderful. You are ordering me to do something, but how can I just act upon that consideration? I have my grandfather standing in front of me, Bhishma. I have my cousins, my brothers. I have my guru. How do I act? Because I have the identity of a disciple, I have the identity of a grandson, I have the identity of a cousin. And I also have the identity of being your servant, being a soul who is part and parcel of you. Which order, which identity should be prioritized? This consideration 5,000 years back was not an ordinary consideration. This prioritization of taking a certain identity meant that he was going to be killing his grandfather. Do you understand that? He was to kill his grandfather, kill his cousins, kill his guru based on assuming a certain identity. And that identity was assuming the identity of being the servant of Krishna. Krishna produced the Bhagavad Gita, the speech. This book is the greatest motivation ever found. Who could be motivated to shoot arrows at your own grandfather and loving beings within 40 minutes? Krishna motivated Arjuna to perform duty and take on identities which were extraordinarily complex. This was not an ordinary situation. A solution was provided on prioritization, taking on proper identities, thereby acting properly. A solution was provided for a very complex situation. And that solution still stands good. Why? It is not only, the problem is eternal. The solution stands good because if something is so extraordinarily complex and it worked in that circumstance, it should surely work for simpler circumstances, which is our case. Surely, for you to be here, for you to participate in the celebration, for you to be able to chant, for you to be able to wake up, for you to be able to surrender to a guru, you are not being asked to kill someone, are you? Are you being asked to harm someone whom you love? Yes or no? No, resoundingly it's no. So our situation is far less complex than it was 5,000 years back. A solution was provided 5,000 years back for us to be able to assume an identity in a complex environment. And that solution worked. Arjuna was enthused by the instructions given by Krishna that he could pick up the bow and arrows, he could fire arrows, and he could take on the identity that needed to be taken on. The identity of being a servant. What was the final message of the Bhagavad Gita? Sarva dharman parityajya, mam ekam sharanam vraja, aham tvam sarva papebhyo mokshayasmi ma suchaha. Why did Krishna say Sarva dharman parityajya? Why is the personality of Godhead, the upholder of all religion, saying, give up duties? Why is he saying that? He is saying there are different levels of duty, and all these duties have come about because you have taken on different identities. You are thinking you are the servant of someone. You're thinking you are the disciple of someone. You're thinking you are the nephew of someone. And duties are born out of such consciousness and such identities. But those duties are subservient to the duty of being a soul who is surrendered to the Supreme. So he's saying, give up the Chala Dharma, the secondary Dharma. Give up the Upadharma, Dharma which is secondary. Give it up, prioritize. Is Krishna saying, do not be a father? Is Krishna saying, do not be a professional? Is Krishna consciousness against corporate rice? Is Krishna consciousness against becoming successful? The answer is no. Krishna consciousness was preached to a monarch. It was preached to a group of people who were encouraged to be most successful. Krishna consciousness was preached to reach full potential against great complexity. That is the same message which was brought forth by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu 500 years back. For Krishna himself, he said surrender. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also said Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. But to what form of Krishna did he say surrender? Name. He said surrender to the name of Krishna, because Nama Naminoho Abhinnatvam. There is no difference between the name and the name. You surrender to the name. This was the instruction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Completely consistent with what was spoken in the Bhagavad Gita. Scripture cannot be inconsistent. If inconsistent scripture is available and it is being adopted by a group of people, they are irreligious. Scripture has to be consistent across the board in everything it gives. That is the meaning of Scripture, because Scripture is truth. And truth cannot be dilly-dallying from century to century. Truth is eternal, it is Satya, and it will remain eternal. No matter what, truth remains as is. Time cannot destroy truth, because truth by nature is eternal. Sat. How can Sat be destroyed by Asat, which is time? Time is a feature of the material world. In the spiritual world, time is eternal. There is a concept of time even in the spiritual sky, but it's a different concept. It is not a concept of creation, maintenance, destruction. It's a different concept. We don't want to deviate from our topic. So, the point which we're trying to make here is that Scripture is consistent, the message is consistent. Krishna said 5,000 years back, Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja, Aham Tvam Sarva Papebhyo Mokshayasmi, Ma Suchaha. He said, do not fear. He said, in your ability to prioritize, Ma Suchaha, do not fear. Just by bringing me into your life, bringing me closer to you, you will not lose anything. Ma Suchaha. He knew that people think. Right? In South India, it's an abomination. In South India, they have deities of Krishna without the flute. Do you know why? In many houses I've seen this. And their claim is that we have deities of Krishna without the flute, because if you give Krishna the flute, he will blow my wealth away. Krishna does not need the flute to blow our wealth away. Honestly. He can do it without the flute. His servants of the servants can do it without the flute. Right? So Krishna is saying, Ma Suchaha, do not worry. If I come into your life, if you chant my names, you associate with my devotees, you take up the practice of Krishna consciousness, you will be completely successful. You will be happy. Ma Suchaha. This is the message. Giving up dharma is what Krishna spoke, and he spoke to a Kshatriya. A Kshatriya is all about dharma. A Brahmana is all about moksha gati. Kshatriya is on the path to dharma. What does a Vaishya do, a businessman? He is focused on artha. And what does a Shudra do? The Shudra exists to satisfy his senses. If we exist to satisfy senses, we are fourth class. And that is the condition of most people in the world today. They exist to eat, sleep, mate and defend. This is Shudra, fourth class. Krishna spoke this to a Kshatriya. He said dharma. And he said Sarva Dharman Parityajya Mamekam Sharanam Vraja. So immediately Krishna knows he is the master strategist. He is the source of all preaching. He is speaking to someone who is hearing his message, and he knows that if I tell him this, his intelligence will stop. So he says, do not worry. Just because I'm asking you to stop dharma, it does not mean that you will not make progress. So he tells his servant Arjun, Ma Suchaha. So how do we take on this complex identity of being a servant of Krishna while managing real issues in our life? I have to go to work come Monday morning. I have to be successful at work. I cannot be mediocre. I have to be a good parent, good husband, good member of the community. a good national, right? How many of us can escape a speed detector while you drive? You got to follow the rules of wherever you live. You got to follow the regular dharma of existing on a certain place. Time, place, and circumstances have to be accounted for. You cannot go above that, right? Unless we are flying through the airways, which is fine. We don't do that. We have to drive, then you have to follow the speed limits. So similarly, there are many roles that we play, and there are speed limits, there are rules, there are regulations. How do we balance that with the demand of being a servant of Krishna? That is a challenge faced by seasoned devotees. I'm saying seasoned because Krishna consciousness is a lifetime. In fact, several lifetimes. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur said an average devotee would take 3 lifetimes. And we do not know what is average in Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's mind. He said an average devotee would take 3 lifetimes. So what does it mean? We have to sustain the practice for 3 lifetimes. How do we do it? It's extraordinarily complex, right? That is the paradox. That is the solution which has been provided in Krishna consciousness. What is being provided here is that if we keep Krishna right in the center, we move to the periphery, and we take decisions based on Krishna being in the center, every decision that we take would be extraordinarily successful. Can we be a good father, professional, by keeping Krishna in the center? Yes or no?
Yes.
We can. This was shown by the Pandavas. They ruled over the entire planet by keeping Krishna right in the center, and they overcame all kinds of complexities. So the fundamental message that we want to get across is, I am pursuing happiness, and I can pursue happiness in 3 levels. I can pursue happiness physically, I can pursue happiness in the mental level, I can pursue happiness at the level of the soul. For me to be able to be really happy, I have to figure out how to make my soul, the real me, happy. And I'll have to figure this out and make arrangements for the body and the mind so that I can do this for 40 years. Assuming someone comes in touch with Krishna consciousness and has to spend 40 years, 50 years. A successful devotee is one who has made that arrangement and has figured it out. How is he going to get up and how is he going to go to bed each and every day for the next few decades, ensuring that he is able to keep Krishna in the center? That is a successful devotee. That is the definition of a successful devotee. So how do we do it? We do it by bringing our senses consistently in touch with Krishna. Now we will come to the topic of why we are celebrating Janmastami on the 18th. It does not matter, right? What does Krishna say? What does he say in 4:9? So in verse 4:9 of the Bhagavad Gita, I'm going to read this. Janma karma chame divyam evam yo vetti tattvataha tektva deham punarjanma naiti mam eti jo Arjuna. The translation by Srila Prabhupada: one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities does not, upon leaving the body, take his birth again in this material world, but attains my eternal abode, O Arjuna. So, what is Krishna making a statement here about? He's saying, one who knows the transcendental nature of my appearance and activities. What is the purpose of a festival? What is the purpose of coming together with Vaishnavas? What is the purpose of discussing Krishna Katha? What does this leave you? What is the attempt that we are trying to do by speaking about this? Glorifying Krishna, but what am I doing? Knowing his transcendental nature, but what else? Let's go a little deeper. What we are trying to do by bringing these actions is to constantly bring forth the identity that I am Krishna's servant. And we are putting impressions in the chitta. I don't need to pretend if I have to deal with my daughter. I don't need to pretend if I have to deal with my workplace. Because the impression cast in my chitta is very deep by my workplace, by my other responsibilities. The impressions are such that I don't have to work hard to remember what my identity is. So what is it that we do with sadhana? What is it that we do by calling out the Lord's names? What is it that we do by congregating together? We are creating impressions on our chitta that we are servants of Krishna. We are coming in touch with experiences that are putting seeds of faith in our heart. Right? Are those Shraddha? First there has to be faith. The particle of faith, when it enters into the heart, it destroys ignorance. So the particle of faith is being deposited when we gather together and we engage in activity of glorification by calling out the holy names. So when these impressions are being created, now I am taking on and awakening my original consciousness. I am getting out of the pretense of being this body and getting into my original consciousness of being a servant of Krishna. We have been pretending for millions of years to be this body. And we have done it so well that we don't even have to work on it. You know, sometimes you hear this expression that you keep lying and you keep lying and you keep lying. And the lie becomes so big that you don't have to lie anymore. It becomes a part of our nature. We have been working at it for millions of lifetimes. We have been pretending that we are this body. We have been pretending that we are someone associated with this body. We have been pretending that we have duties beyond and kind of not anything to do with this body. We have been pretending for millions of years. Now, when we come in touch with faith, real faith, when we hear Harinam, when we hear the names of God, when we come in touch with rituals associated with real faith, those rituals leave impressions in our chitta. And those impressions have the ability to bring forth and allow us the strength to take on that identity. This memory will come back to us tomorrow. Oh, someone said, I'm a servant of Krishna. A group of people sang the names of Krishna. That was so wonderful. Now faith is slowly working on us deep within. The more and more and more we have impressions of this kind, it reinforces the fact that we are servants of Krishna. That is the objective of sadhana bhakti. Every morning, the Guru says, you wake up and you chant, you associate with devotees, you serve, you read scripture. Why does the Guru say this? The Guru says that because each and every time we do that, an impression is being created in the chitta. An impression of I am a servant is being created. How many of us like to wake up and jump out of bed at 4 o'clock in the morning? Mataji. Okay, 5:30? Okay, I'll give you that. That's fine. How many of us like to wake up very early in the morning on a cold winter day when things are very warm and they're very cold outside? How many of us would like to jump in the shower at 4 o'clock in the morning, 3 in the morning? Right? How many of us have seen this consistently year after year in Krishna consciousness? During the December marathon, devotees brave the cold. Devotees brave the cold. It's intensely cold. They take books and they go and distribute. There were devotees in many parts of the world who died distributing books in Russia. They didn't have books. They could not print. So they used to typewrite a Bhagavad Gita. Can you imagine typewriting a Bhagavad Gita? They used to typewrite multiple copies and they used to take it out. And book distribution in Russia those days did not mean Lakshmi points. It meant death if you're caught. What were the odds and why did someone pick up the book? Why did someone sit down, start typing and wanting to distribute at the cost of their own lives? What was the impression created? The impression, the samskara created in the chitta was you're a servant of Krishna. Srila Prabhupada just met one devotee in Russia. Can you believe it? I think he just met one person. He just met one person. He said the mission will continue because of that meeting. Just one person. So the pure particle of faith carried by Srila Prabhupada was deposited in the heart of one person. And that spark was enough to destroy the ignorance in the hearts of many others in one single country. To such an extent that they did not mind risking their lives to distribute Srila Prabhupada's books, the Bhagavad Gita. It is not $10 anymore, is it? You distribute it, you could be put away for life. What made people do that? People did that because the impression that they were servants of Krishna were so strong. And those impressions were cultivated year after year, when they chanted in the mornings, when they participated in kirtan, when they associated with people who are like-minded, when they read scripture. Scripture is all about teaching us how to live the Shastra. We read the Srimad Bhagavatam and we understand, oh, this is possible. We understand that a 5-year-old can go to the forest all alone, he can live on nothing, and he can meditate on the holy names. Who did that? Sri Dhruva Maharaj. We read scripture and we say, oh, this is possible. You know, in the armed forces, in the special forces in America, they call this evolution. They say there's a mental evolution where the mind is accepting a new reality. People think, I cannot do this. And then they force them to do something and the mind starts accepting it's possible. So when we read the Srimad Bhagavatam, what do we understand? It is possible to stop eating. It is possible to be a 5-year-old and not worry about sleeping. It is possible to be a 5-year-old and not be afraid of animals and be in isolation. Scripture gives us and prepares us for the experiences that we have when we do what? When we serve. So that's the last part. The most important aspect of taking up bhakti in Krishna consciousness is for us to be able to serve. Because when we serve, the impressions created in the chitta are far more powerful. Right? It's very important for us to serve with our limbs. And all levels of service are the same. One who prepares prasadam in the kitchen for distribution during a preaching program. One who cleans the hall. One who speaks. One who sings. Everybody is on the same level of contribution because all of this is engaging in the act of propagating the holy names. When we consistently engage in such activity, we become more conscious of ourselves and Krishna. And that is the principle of Krishna consciousness. That is the principle enunciated by Krishna. He is telling Arjuna, I am right next to you. Take on the identity of being my servant and act. Similarly, we practice becoming Krishna's servants and we act. And this does not mean we are not going to be successful. It means you're going to be extraordinarily successful. Okay? I'm going to stop right here. As I promised, I went over 5 minutes. Maybe I can take one question.
What about the happiness you have to discuss about?
The happiness? I gave all the secrets of happiness. It all is about, good question. Happiness, which we spoke of, 3 levels. We spoke of the body, we spoke of the mind, we spoke of the soul. Bodily happiness is given up by some so that they can experience mental peace. Have you seen executives in the corporations? They take some time off and go to a log cabin in the forest. And in that cabin there is no electricity, no power, no water, nothing. And why do they go there? They're CEOs of corporations. They have millions, they have billions in the bank account. Why do they go to the log cabin in the forest? Anybody knows? They are going to seek mental peace. To seek mental peace, they are ready to give up physical happiness. Right? Now, we are talking about pursuing happiness at a completely different level, the happiness of the soul. For taking on the happiness of the soul, which is eternal, which can overpower anything in the life. Right? If 80% to 90% of your happiness comes from the soul, would you be worried if 10% goes here and there? Right? What is 10%? Maybe I may have my job, maybe not job, maybe my health is going to be good, maybe not. We do not know. If 90% of your happiness comes from the soul, 10% comes from the body and the mind, you don't have to worry. But for that, there has to be a little bit of a sacrifice. So we compromise on our normal inclinations of wanting to enjoy with the body and with the mind so that we can experience real happiness at the level of the soul. And what is that process? The process is very simple. In Krishna consciousness, we don't fast. I don't think we fast. Do we ever fast even on Ekadasi? The feast is even more elaborate on Ekadasi than on regular days. Right? The Janmastami feast, that is worth fasting the whole day for. Right? We are a feasting religion. That's who we are. So we do not compromise on bodily happiness, but we experience bodily happiness by coming in touch with Krishna. We eat and we sleep, mate, defend for Krishna. That's the distinction. By doing so, we learn to experience immense mental happiness. That's not the goal of Krishna consciousness, mental peace. But we experience it. It's a side benefit. We also experience immense bliss. If we get used to bliss which is available at a very deep level, which is not dependent on who the president is, it is not dependent on whether we have a job, we don't have a job, it is not dependent on whether we are healthy, not healthy, young, old, then you have it made. That is the proposition of happiness. So for the last 2.5 hours, you experienced great happiness. I was the anticlimax, right? There was wonderful kirtan by Prabhu here and Vishnu Gada Prabhu. I wanted to kind of be the bitter pot. I don't know, most of you are Bengalis. When do you have the bitter pot during your meal? Is it the beginning or the end? The beginning? Right. So maybe we are Gujaratis here. They have the sweet in the beginning and then they have the bitter pot in the end. So I'm here to provide you a little perspective on the wonderful things that you enjoyed with the kirtan. Okay? So that was the happiness we experienced. The happiness that we experienced was by coming in touch with Krishna. And that has nothing to do with the body. Someone can be sick sitting here and they can be happy. Someone can be completely agitated and yet they can connect to the kirtan and become happy. So the happiness being provided in Krishna consciousness is at a deep level. So let's quickly summarize. First, we have to assume an identity for us to act. It's most important to remember that amongst the multiple identities, we are servants of Krishna. Assuming that identity would allow us to excel in every other identity. Number 2, it was an extraordinarily complex situation that was solved by the Bhagavad Gita. And the resolution was, keep Krishna in the center, move to the periphery. And what is the third message we provided? We provided the message of happiness, thanks to Prabhu. That there are different levels of happiness. If you experience happiness at the deepest level, the level of the soul, then you would be independent of the fluctuations that happen in life. The more and more we come in touch with Krishna consciousness, deeper would be the impressions of us becoming servants of Krishna. And that is exactly the message of the Bhagavad Gita. So we can have Janmashtami every day, not just once a year. We can have Janmashtami every day, and that would allow us to be able to serve. Okay? Any other question, any comment? Thank you very much. The Prabhupada ki